My name's Fidan. I'm a family law solicitor practicing in Sydney, Australia, and today I'm going to tell a story as part of Case Note Friday. It's called The Scientologist. It's a case I had from many, many years ago. This is the story of Pippa and Fred. Pippa and Fred met on the internet when Pippa was in her early 20s. He was in his early 30s. It was about a 10-year age gap. Now, Pippa had never had a boyfriend before, so she was so excited that she finally met a really nice guy on the internet. Fred was American. She was Australian. She was a hairdresser. He was a finance broker / financial advisor. Now, they spoke on the internet for many, many years before they actually saw each other face to face. They did FaceTime and she did video conference him. So she was confident the man that she was talking to online did actually look like his picture because they did actually FaceTime in real time. But neither of them were of sufficient means to be able to travel between America and Australia to visit one another. She still lived at home with her parents in northern Queensland, and he was living in America. Now, after a couple of years, he told her that he's a Scientologist, and he had held that information back because he didn't want her to judge him because of all the sort of stuff you hear in the media about Scientology. She doesn't know anything about Scientology other than Tom Cruise is one, and John Travolta is one, and that's about all she knew. She did think that it was something to do with believing in aliens. That's as far as she knew. She didn't really care what religion he was. She was not religious. And she wanted to build a life with him. Pippa was determined to somehow get to America so that they could actually live happily ever after together. Now, after 5 years of dating online, he proposes to her. He's about 35, she's about 25. She says yes, they get married. And before long, she's able to go to America. She has a green card. She's living in America with him. Now, he's renting a flat in LA, and she's excited to finally be living with him. When she's there, all isn't as it seems because he doesn't have a lot of furniture, he doesn't have a lot of clothes, and their apartment has barely anything in it in terms of kitchenalia, stuff in the bedrooms. The linen cupboard has like one sheet, the cupboard has like one mug, he has like 3 forks. It was all kind of povo. And she was a little bit surprised to see that. But nonetheless, he lived in LA, and she thought, well, this must just be the life of a bachelor. What does she know? She's never had a man before. But nonetheless, it's her husband, and she's a qualified hairdresser, and she's able to work. So she starts working as a hairdresser, but she's earning minimum wage, and it's barely enough money. And he says he's a financial advisor. He should manage all the money in the relationship. So, of course, she puts all of her wages into his account. Initially, it's his account because she hasn't set up a bank account, but when she does, it's a joint account. And all her money goes in there. It's very modest. He says that he's struggling to make it as a financial advisor. Let's face it, he wasn't a very good one. But nonetheless, he says to her, I've got this great idea. The stock market is doing great things, and I think we should invest. We should invest in medicinal marijuana because that's where all the money is. She was somewhat skeptical, and she says to him, but we don't have any money to invest. And he says, why don't you hit up your parents for some money? Now, her parents are elderly. She's an only child. They're both in their 70s. And she's like, okay. So she asked her parents for some money to invest on their behalf because her husband's a flashy financial advisor, right? They agree to give her $100,000 Australian dollars, which they give to their daughter, Pippa, who then gives to her husband to then invest for her parents. But really for them, but whatever. He invests it, so he says, in medicinal marijuana and says it's on the stock market, it's going to do great things. This is the next big thing, right? That's what he said. So they're living over there. Meanwhile, she says, living below the poverty line, not having enough money to make ends meet. They're barely making the rent and just not having enough money to go shopping, go on holidays, all the lifestyle stuff, the stuff she thought living in LA would have. She didn't have any of it, and she's working like a dog every day for minimum wage. So she says to him, why don't we go to Australia? There's a lot of opportunities there for us. You will make much more money. I can make more money. And we're struggling here. And we have the option because she's an Australian citizen and they're married. So at this point, they've been married for about 5 years. So she's about 30, he's about 40. And really, they're not making ends meet. And he was like, okay, he still has his Scientology religion. He checks out Australia. We, of course, have Scientologies here in the Church of Scientology. So he agrees to come. They go to Queensland. They initially move in with her parents. Now, at this stage, her parents are getting older and struggling. They end up both going to a nursing home. So they end up living in the house owned by her parents free of rent, which is fortunate because they've never had a house themselves. They only ever lived in that crappy apartment. So they live with in her parents' house, but without her parents for a couple of years. And her parents are doing okay. Eventually, her dad dies, leaves everything to her mum. Her mum still hangs in there, even though she's got dementia, hangs in there for a couple more years. Now, her parents had seemingly forgot about the $100,000 that they had given many years earlier to invest, just thought it was doing well and perhaps it wasn't making any dividends, but he had always said, it's not about dividends, it's about growth. Those shares don't pay dividends. We're going to sell them and then we're going to make all this money. That's what he kept saying. We can't sell them yet. We've got to hold them. They're a growth share. And she trusted him, so Pippa wasn't too minded by it, but thought, Fred's a financial advisor and yet we're not particularly doing well financially. So she was a bit nervous about it, and frankly, she wasn't very happy in the relationship. She was worried that when her mum dies, she's going to come into a big inheritance and that Fred is going to get it and perhaps that is have a share of it, and perhaps he's going to try and invest it so not so wisely. This is where I come in. So Pippa comes to see me and says, Verdana, I need some legal advice. I'm miserable in my marriage. I've got my husband here. He doesn't know anyone in Australia. He's only here for me, essentially. And he's trying to make ends meet, but he's not particularly doing well. And I feel like I'm the one who's always financially supporting him. And my mum is now the sole surviving parent. I'm going to come into a decent inheritance of about $1 million because they have a house and some investments. And she's worried that he's going to be able to make a claim. So I give her some advice, and basically, if they're together, if the inheritance vests in her, then it's going to be part of the asset pool to divide if at the time her mum passes away. If they're already separated and have already done their settlement, the future inheritance will be hers. So I didn't tell her to separate, but I said, think about it. Think about what you're going to do, both emotionally, that is whether or not you want to end the relationship, or and what you're going to do financially in the future. And she said, well, I really want to know what happened to that money that I gave him all those years earlier. Did he really invest it? And did we really make any money? But I said, once you get me involved, he will know that it's a separation conversation because I'm a divorce lawyer. She tried to ask him about that money. She never did find out. So about 6 months later, she decided that she wanted him out of her house. Remember, he's living in the house owned by her parents, and says to me, I want you to send a letter to Fred to ask him to move out, and he can disclose what he did with my parents' money. So I do that. I write a letter to Fred and say the relationship has come to an end. She's not happy. Remember, she's 10 years younger than him, so she wanted to do a lot of things, and he didn't. And she felt like that he was sponging off her. And let's face it, he was kind of sponging off her. So, and she was very worried about this inheritance that she's coming into. Her mum was still alive, though. So I write him a letter, say that separation has happened. Please move out of the home. And I gave him like 42 days to vacate. He did, in fact, vacate. And what he did was he went back to America. So she says to me, okay, my mum is very unwell. Something's going to happen. We need to do the settlement. So I say to him, we need to do the settlement. He's ignoring me. I'm sending him emails. He's ignoring me. So we end up starting a court case. I serve him with papers in America, which was very hard to do because I had to find him. It was only through social media that we managed to track him down and serve him with papers. So once we do that, I ask him to disclose what happened to the investment, because I said the asset pool is basically nothing. There's only the shares that they invested with the parents' money and a little bit of money in the bank, and she had a little bit of super, not much, and he had a little bit of super. So when we eventually did that, it turns out that he had donated that money to the Church of Scientology. He didn't invest it on the market. All that medicinal marijuana crap never happened. He literally gave it to the Church of Scientology as a donation, and they had no money to speak of. So in the end, they settled. They basically just did a walk away. She basically walked away with what she had, and so did he. He was able to... they divorced, and she was able to protect the inheritance that came in 1 year later from, sadly, after her mother died. But we made sure that he didn't get any of it because we did a final settlement. They divorced, separated, and she never heard from him again. But I guess the reason the story is important is don't always trust when somebody says they've invested your money. They may not have. And secondly, if you're coming into money and you're in a miserable relationship, she was very clever by coming to me to say, let's do a settlement because I don't want him to get any part of my inheritance. Had that inheritance have come in, and remember, her mum died 1 year after we did that settlement, then she would have had to split the inheritance with him because it was her husband of all those years. So that's the end of the story.